Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Ches of Masechta Shabbos. Man, I've been home all day. Exciting times. Yeah, I've been home all day. I haven't left the house. That's been exciting. Alright. But it's been interesting. Okie dokie. Today there's some interesting stuff in store. Can you start a malacha on Erev Shabbos and let it continue into Shabbos? That sounds interesting. What's considered, we're going to discuss the malacha of lush, of kneading dough, or see how it extends potentially to other things as well. Are we obligated to make sure that our inanimate objects have a day of rest as well? Can you have things in the oven, cooking, baking, roasting all Shabbos? These are all things that are going to make an appearance today. So we got a jam-packed day. Let's go for it. So we're going to start at the Mishnah on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, about 8 lines before it gets wider. So Beis Shammai Omer, say Beis Shammai, Ein shorin dio v'samanim v'karshinin ela kadei sheyishoru mibod yom v'sila matirin. So according to Beis Shammai, if you want to soak ink or dyes or vetch, which is some kind of like animal food that I guess you would soak, you have to make sure that they have enough time to properly soak before Shabbos starts, right? Once Shabbos, you don't want them to be, soaking on Shabbos, or at least, make sure that they have enough time before Shabbos to at least soak enough that they would be considered ready. Uvesil matirin. Vesil doesn't have any problem with allowing these things to continue to soak on Shabbos. Beis Shammai omrim, enosnin onin shel pishtan l'soch hasanur hatanur ela kedei sheyahavilu mibehod yom. Beis Shammai says that do not take bundles of linen and put them in, and Rashi points out, which is going to be important later on, and he puts them in some kind of a receptacle, some kind of a kli, and then he puts that kli into the oven, and then he heats up the oven so that it's part of the bleaching process of the linen to make it white. So don't do that. Make sure that they're already going to get warmed up while it is still daylight. And if you're going to be putting wool into some kind of a kettle that contains dye in it, because you want to dye this wool, make sure that the wool is there for enough time before Shabbos commences, that it will be able to absorb a sufficient amount of dye. Uvesil matirin, Beis says no problem. You could just chuck the wool into the kettle right before Shabbos and let it collect that dye over Shabbos. Beis Shammai omrim, say the holy house of Shammai, in porsim mitzudas chaya ve'ofos v'dagim ela kedei she'yitzodu mibod yom v'sil matirin. Beis Shammai says, do not put out traps for wild animals, birds, and fish, unless there is enough time for them to actually trap epis before Shabbos starts. But don't put them out like mamash before Shabbos, where there's really no chance where they're going to actually catch anything. And Beis Hillel says it's okay. Now, just a thing about what's the difference between a chaya and a behema. A chaya is a wild animal. A behema is a domesticated animal. An example of a domesticated animal is a sheep, a goat, a cow. An example of a wild animal would be a deer. Those are in terms of kosher animals, let's say, to eat that you'd be trapping, but otherwise horses, donkeys. Oh no, I think donkey lemaisa is actually domesticated. Definitely domesticated. There are wild donkeys that aren't, but yeah, donkeys are domesticated. Wait, well then what about horses? Are horses domesticated? Alright, I'm confusing myself. Let's just stick to the basics, right? Sheep, goats, cows, domesticated. Deers, not domesticated. Weiter. Beis Shammai omrim, say Beis Shammai, Ein mochrin l'nachri, you don't sell anything to a non-Jew, ve'ein to'anin imo, and if you and you don't help him put something onto his donkey. I guess if you're like giving it to him or something like that, because we already said don't sell to him. So I guess if you're like giving something to him or whatever it is, don't help him. Don't be like putting something on his donkey for him. Ve'ein magbi'in olav, and don't pick up something and put it on his back. Ela kadei she'yagia l'makom karov, unless there's enough time for him to arrive to a place that is to make sure that wherever he's going is close enough that he would be able to get there during daylight. And the Gemara is going to talk about exactly what this means. Beisil matir, and Beisil says it's no problem. You can get it on his back and let him walk on Shabbos. Who cares? Beishamai omim enosnin oros leabdan v'lo kelim lechobes nachri ela kedei sheyasim ba'od yom. Do not give hides to a tanner, and do not give clothing to a launderer, to a cleaner, a clothing cleaner, who's non-Jewish. There would have to be enough time for him to do these activities before the day begins, before Shabbos begins. And before all of these things, Beis Hillel says it is mutar. Okay. Im hashemesh, as long as it is still light outside. Amar b'Shimon Gamliel said Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So this is pretty interesting. So noagin hayu beis abba sheyunosnin klei lavan lechobes nachri shlosh yom kodem l'Shabbos. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that in the house of his father, and as we learned, was it yesterday or the day before, that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, or was it even 3 days ago? Oh my gosh, we're flying. But we learned 3 days ago that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's father was Rabban Gamliel HaZaken. And we're saying that in the household of Rabban Gamliel HaZaken, they would davka give their clothing, their white clothing that were more difficult to clean and would take 3 days to clean, they would make sure to give them to the dry cleaner 3 days before Shabbos starts in order to make sure that the dry cleaner would not be working on them on Shabbos. And Rashi points out, right, umachmirin al atzman k'beis Shammai, that Rabban Gamliel HaZaken was being machmir like Beis Shammai. So this is interesting for a few reasons. Reason number one is that Rabban Gamliel HaZaken was the grandson of Hillel. So he's the grandson of Hillel and he's doing like Beis Shammai. Another interesting thing is that whatever happened to that whole thing about, the boss called, the voice came out of heaven and said we don't pass like Beis Shammai, we pass like Beis Hillel. And then there was that story that I come back to whenever we find things like this. With Rabbi Tarfon, that he did like Beis Shammai, and they said, you deserve to put your life in danger, because you did like Beis Shammai, we do like Beis Hillel. So to answer that, I think you might be able to say that this was maybe before the voice came out of heaven, right? Because the whole thing with the voice coming out of heaven was it's a Gemara in Eruvin on Daf Yud Gimel and Beis. I didn't know that. I looked it up, and it talks about how Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they're always arguing until a voice came out and said, look, we do like Beis Hillel. But that was like the students of Shammai and Hillel. And Rabban Gamliel HaZaken was the grandson of Hillel. It's possible that this voice hadn't yet come out of heaven. But it's interesting that they were doing like Beis Shammai in any event. V'shavin elu ve'elu shetoanin koraz Beis Abad ve'igule agas. But both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that you can kind of go to an olive press. So I guess that after they would do the initial sort of crushing of the olives, they would then take this like big beam or whatever and like smush the olives so whatever remaining oils would come out. And they would do the same thing with the grape press as well. After they did the initial press, I guess they would put some heavy, board on top of it to get out whatever remaining juices were darting. So both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that you'd be able to do this on Erev Shabbos and let the oil and juice continue to ooze out over Shabbos. And Rashi points out that's because even if you do it on Shabbos, it would only, you wouldn't be chayev a korban chatas, because the issue with extracting would be the malacha of dash, threshing, right? The issue with that is extracting. So extracting juice from a grape or extracting olives from oil from an olive would be dash. But in this case, you've already extracted the initial oil, and now you're just kind of like getting out the rest. It's no longer dash. I don't know. So maybe it's also midrabanan or something. But therefore, they both agree that if you do it before Shabbos, it would be allowed to just let the juice or the oil ooze out on Shabbos. Let's go weiter in Shas. Says the Gemara, Mantana nesinas mayim l'dio zoi shir yasan. Interesting. So who's the Tana who would say that simply adding water, and I assume that what dio is over here, it's talking about like ink powder, right? We get ballpoint pens and we just write. But once upon a time, you'd have to make ink, and then that was the ink you'd use to write. So to make that ink, or maybe if anybody here has experience with being a scribe, maybe Josh Fleet, maybe you have experience with that, or maybe Sam Griffin, if you're listening, right, with dyes and inks and stuff. But I think that they would take some kind of like a powder and then add water, and then that water would make, and then that's how they would make their inks. So now the interesting thing is that, so now here we get into kneading, right? So you're going to ask, what does making dye have to do with kneading? What does making ink have to do with kneading? So the way I understand it is basically whenever you have a situation where you're adding water to some kind of a dry powder, that already falls under the kneading, like kneading a dough, right? So a dough, you take dry flour, and then you add water to the flour, and then you kind of mix it together and do whatever other stuff you got to add to it, and then you start kneading it with your hands, right? So adding water to the dry flour would be ki'ilu, an integral part of, or, a step one in kneading. Okay, you can't knead before you first add water. So here also, even though you're not kneading this ink, but you're adding water to a dry product. So therefore we're considering, so the question is, who, according to whom, would simply adding water to this dry ink powder be considered the melacha of lush? That therefore, Beis Shammai would say, make sure that there's enough time before Shabbos, okay, because simply adding water to this powder would suffice already as lush. And as Rashi points out as well, that the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is, can you continue, if you've done it before Shabbos, can you allow it to continue on to Shabbos? But they would both agree that you wouldn't be allowed to do it milichatchila on Shabbos. You wouldn't be allowed to add water to the powder on Shabbos, which means that they both agree that there is a problem with that. Now we're trying to figure out, which Tana is that in line with in terms of how he sees the malacha of kneading, that this would go like him. So man Tana nesinas mayim l'dio zoi shir yasun. So who is the Tana who says that adding water to this ink powder is already considered, soaking, and that soaking would be significant enough to consider it to be a violation of the malacha of kneading, of lush? So Rav Yosef Rebbe. So Rav Yosef, of course, we said on the last daf of Brachos, is the Sinai, right? He knew, he had a vast encyclopedic memory of brises, so he jumps to it and he says, look, I'll quote you a brisa to prove to you that it's Rebbe. The Tanya is, we learn in a brisa, Echa nosein es hakemach, ve'echa nosein es hamayim. If Reuven puts flour into a bowl, and then Shimon adds water to the flour, ha'achron chayev divrei Rebbe. So according to Rebbe, Shimon is going to be chayev for adding the water to the flour, even though he didn't need it at all. Simply adding the water to the flour was enough to make him chayev for the malacha of kneading. Rabbi Yossi, so there, I have a letter here that points out that it's actually Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Okay? So Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Eno chayev ad sheigabo. Whereas Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says, no, simply adding water to flour is not enough. You would actually have to knead, you'd have to mix it together, and then you'd have to actually knead it in order to be chayev the malacha of lush, of kneading. Okay, so therefore, our Mishnah, which assumes that adding water to this ink powder is enough to be considered a malacha, would be like Rebbe, who says that adding water to flour is enough to be considered kneading. Amalei Abaye says, so of course Abaye, who's always right after Rav Yosef, always comes Abaye, or often comes Abaye. So Abaye says to Rav Yosef, V'dilma, Ad kan lo kam Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, el bekemach de bar gibulhu. But 1 second, Abaye asks Rav Yosef, maybe Rabbi Yossi only says when it comes to flour, that you would actually have to mix it together and knead it in order to be chayev for lush, because flour is something that you can actually knead. Aval dio, dilav bar gibulhu. However, ink, which is not something that you need, right? Maybe somebody who's familiar with ink powders can confirm for us, but it's something that you simply, it sounds like, you add water and you're good to go. You don't have to do an intensive kneading process or mixing process in order to make it. So maybe Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda would say that in the case of ink, he would also agree that you'd be chayev for lush by just adding water. So the Gemara says, Lo sagadaitech. No, Abaye, that's not going to work. The Tanya, because we learn in the Brisa, Echad nosen as a efer, v'echad nosen as hamayim, that if Reuven puts some ash into a bowl, and then Shimon adds water to that ash, ha'achron chayev divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says that Shimon is going to be chayev for adding the water. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Omer ad she'yigabel. Whereas Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says, no, you would actually have to mix together the water with the ash in order to be chayev. So, that is basically similar to this dye powder, that you simply add water, that's enough, and still Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is saying that you would have to actually mix it together, it's not enough to add the water. The Dilma my Afer offer. But in support of Abaye, the Gemara says, yeah, but maybe, what does Afer mean? Maybe it's really afar. Maybe it's not ash, it's actually dirt. Meaning you're going to make some kind of a cement, right? You're going to take dirt and mix it with water and make some kind of a thick cement. And that's why Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is saying that you'd have to mix it together. However, if it was, simply ash or, this dye powder, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda would say adding water is enough to make you chayev. My offer debar gibuhu, because offer is something that you can, dirt is something that you can actually mix together and make like a cement. V'atanya afer, the Gemara says, what do you mean? How could it be dirt? It says afer. Afer is ash, right? So v'atanya offer. But then, sort of Abaye would respond, yeah, but we actually have another brisa which says afar, which is dirt. So maybe it really is dirt, right? And therefore, Abaye would argue that specifically something that is mixable is where Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda would say that you'd actually have to mix it, but something not mixable like ash or like ink powder, simply adding water would be enough to make you chayev. So the Gemara says, Midi gabe adade Tanya, but are they taught together? No, they're not together. Meaning, apparently there's two brisas. One brisa says that when you add water to ash, there's a machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. And then there's a separate brisa, which is when you add water to dirt, there's that same machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, that Rebbe would say that adding water to dirt would be enough to make you chayev. And since they're taught in two separate places, that must mean that they're two separate machlokas, and each one can stand in its own, which means that there is a machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda about if you add water to ash, would that be enough to make you chayev for lush? And Rebbe seems to be saying yes, and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda seems to be saying no. So we seem to be saying, we've seemed to have found our answer of who is the Tana who would say that adding water to ink powder would be enough to make you chayev for lush. It would be Rebbe. Wow. Okay. Very cool. So what did we just learn? We just learned a little bit about the melacha of lush, of kneading on Shabbos, right? That is taking water, adding it to, in its pure sense, adding it to flour and kneading it into dough. But we see that this seems to basically apply to any place where you would take water and add it to a powder. That would seem to be affiliated with the melacha of lush. Okay, weiter. Taner Abanan, Poskin Maim Legina Erev Shabbos Mchashecha Umismalas Veoleches Kol Yom Kulo. So you would be allowed to create dig like a channel on Erev Shabbos, right before Shabbos. You'd be able to create like a channel from like a spring, from a water source, and then dig a channel that would go to your field so that over Shabbos water can be transferred from the spring into your field and irrigate your field. You can put some kind of incense, right? We talked about this in Gemara Brachos, I believe on Daf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, right? About how they would take incense and put it under their clothing to make it smell good. So you can, sort of burn the incense on Erev Shabbos and have it burn throughout the entire Shabbos and make your clothing smell really nice. And you can put sulfur and you can burn sulfur. Maybe if we have friends over who are listening who are familiar with creating jewelry, making jewelry. Maybe you're familiar, or even just silver, right? They would, I guess, take sulfur and they would burn it. I think they would like etch shapes and designs into the silver, and then they would burn sulfur under it, and that would sort of bring out the color and the depth, I guess, in these shapes. So you can start burning the sulfur on Erev Shabbos and let it continue to burn throughout Shabbos. You could put an eye patch over your eye, and you could put some kind of bandage over a wound, and your wound will continue to heal throughout Shabbos. However, do not, if you're going to put wheat into a wheat mill or a flour mill, even if it's a rechaim shamayim, so I assume that what that is like, one of those mills that was like right by the water, and the water would kind of turn that like wheel, and then that would kind of turn the mill. So even though you're not doing anything, you're just putting the wheat in the mill, and it's just going to be making flour on its own all Shabbos. Do not do that. Okay? Only if there's enough time on Erev Shabbos to grind all the wheat. But otherwise, don't have it grind all Shabbos. My timer. What's the nafkamina? How come you can't, how come, for example, I'm allowed to dig a channel, according to this brisa, how come I'm allowed to dig a channel from the spring into my field and allow it to irrigate all Shabbos, yet I can't just plop a bunch of wheat into a mill on Erev Shabbos and let it grind all Shabbos? So So Rabbah, also going back to the last daf of brachas, Rabbah was the Oker Harim, right? He was more of a svara person than a bekiyas person, so he comes up with a svara, right? He says because the mill is going to make a lot of noise while it's working, and it's not mechubar, it's mizalzel, as Rashi says, right? It's zilzul. It's not nice that on Shabbos there should be all this work going on, even if you're not doing anything, it's doing on its own. But you shouldn't be having flour mills on Shabbos. You should have zmiris on Shabbos. Oh, Amr of Yosef says of Yosef, v'leiv amar misum shvisas kelim detanya. Oh, so now Rav Yosef brings his opinion based on a brisa, and he says that why don't you say that the issue here is that your tools also deserve a day of rest. Your flour mill works hard all week. It deserves a day of rest. Shvisas kelim, that your kelim, your vessels have to have Shabbos too. Also, in that same parak of brachos, we talked about also ner sheshavas, right? A flame that was shomer Shabbos as well, which was interesting. These like inanimate kind of things and how, their activities relate to Shabbos as well. The Tanya is, we learn in a brisa. So, it says in this pasuk, right? It says, "L'man yanuach shorcha v'chamorecha v'yinafesh ben amascha ve'ager," right? That your ox and your donkey have to have Shabbos as well. And then it says, "U'v'chol asher amarti aleichem tishameru," and everything. B'chol, kol is an include. It's coming to include something. Everything that I've told you, you shall guard. L'rabo shvisas kelim. What is included in everything? Even your objects, even your kelim, your vessels, such including your flour mill. Your flour mill also deserves to get a day off, and that's why you cannot use it. So Elam Rav Yosef mishum shvitzas kelim, and therefore Rav Yosef says that his opinion is that the flour mill is not usable on Shabbos, even if you put all the wheat there before Shabbos, because you are commanded to allow your vessels to rest. So now the Gemara just makes an assumption right now. And that assumption is that this brisa is Beis Hillel. Why is there assumption that this brisa is Beis Hillel? Because the resha of because we keep on saying, you can have that channel from your spring to your field and let it irrigate all Shabbos. You can light, the incense and let it bring fragrance to your clothing all Shabbos. It's basically very similar to Beis Hillel's opinion in our Mishnah, which is like, right, Beis Shammai was saying that you're not allowed to like soak ink right before Shabbos and let it continue into Shabbos. Beis Hillel says no problem, right? Beis Hillel says that you can, bleach your linen all Shabbos, no problem, right? Beis Hillel doesn't seem to have an issue with letting melachas continue into Shabbos, and therefore, the Gemara is assuming at this point that the author of this brisa, who's saying that you can do all these things on Erev Shabbos, let them continue into Shabbos, must be Beis Hillel. And Beis Hillel is saying that you would not be allowed to put wheat into the flour mill before Shabbos because of Shvisas Kelim, at least according to Rav Yosef, because you have to allow your vessels to rest. Okay. So, V'hasha da Amar Beis Hillel islu Shvisas Kelim de'oraisa. Well, then if we're saying that according to Beis Hillel, they say that Shvisas Kelim is midoraisa, and that's why you're not allowed to use the flour mill. So then Gafris umugmar, well then sulfur, right? We said that you're allowed to put sulfur under the silver, and that you're allowed to put incense under your clothing. Well, my taima sharu, why is that allowed? Mistama, you're not just putting the sulfur on the floor. Mistama, you're not just putting the incense on the floor. Mistama, you're putting it in some kind of receptacle. And that receptacle is entitled to a day off. So the Gemara answers no, b'shum delo ka'avid ma'aseh, but the receptacle isn't doing anything. The mill, the flour mill is grinding flour, therefore it deserves a day off. But for the bowl that the incense is in, or that the sulfur is in, it's not really doing anything. It's just sitting there anyways. So therefore, it could sit there over Shabbos while these things are burning, and it wouldn't be a violation of Shvisas Kelim. The Gemara asks, Onin shal pishtan my time masharu. What about when you take those bundles of linen and you put them into a kli, and you put that kli in the oven to warm up the linen so that they become white? So why is that allowed, right? What about that kli that the bundles are in? Doesn't it deserve to rest? So the same answer, mishum delo avid ma'aseh umenach naicha. Because you're not doing anything, you're just leaving it in the oven and letting these things whiten over Shabbos. So therefore it will be okay. Okay, weiter. Mitzudas chaya ve'ov v'dagim. What about the fact that Beis Hillel says in the Mishnah that you're allowed to put out traps for wild animals, birds, and fish on Shabbos? In those cases, it's doing something, right? The trap is actually trapping something on Shabbos, right? Let's say you have some kind of a trap that an animal kind of steps on some kind of a trigger and it snaps on its leg or something. So the trap is doing something on Shabbos. It's actually trapping your animal. So why is that allowed? So the Gemara answers, so my time is sharu. So also nami belechi v'kokare t'lo ma'aseh. So the Gemara really just answers fish traps. I don't know what about what. So how does that answer why let's say deer traps would be allowed? I don't know, but maybe based on the answer that they give for fish traps, we can understand maybe what the answer would be for deer traps. But for fish traps, he gives two examples. One would be a fishing rod, right? You just kind of take a rod, you leave it there before Shabbos. It's got a fish line with a hook at the end of it. And if the fish wants to bite it, the fish wants to bite it, but he's not doing anything. It's just kind of happening memela. So the kli isn't doing anything. The fish is finding the thing and biting it himself. And the other option would be almost like almost like a Chinese finger trap, right? So where you you stick your fingers in and they get caught, you can't pull it out. So they would do that also for the fish, right? It would basically kind of like those ovens that they had back then, which was like a cone that the top was clipped off. So they imagine that like a cone with the top cut off, and then you put that in the water, and then a fish kind of swims in through the wider part of the cone, and then its head pokes out from the cut off top part of the cone, and then its head is kind of like stuck there, and the cone gets behind its what are those called? Its gills, right? And then it can't get out and it gets stuck. So the trap didn't do anything. The fish kind of trapped itself. So maybe we would also need something like that also for the in terms of Shvisas Kelim. So you would also need those kind of traps probably for Chaya and Oaf as well. Okay, fine. Very good. Okay. But 1 second. It's not that good. Up until now we've been assuming that price is Beis Hillel. V'hashda Amar Rav Oshaya. Amar Rav Asi, But one second, Rav Oshaya said the name of Rav Asi. Man Tana Shvisas Kelim D'Oraisa. Who's the Tana who says that Shvisas Kelim is D'Oraisa? Guess what? Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai is the one who says that Shvisas Kelim is D'Oraisa. V'lo Beis Hillel. And not Beis Hillel. And therefore, so Beis Hillel does not hold the Shvisas Kelim. According to Beis Hillel, your Kelim do not have to keep Shabbos. Your Kelim can go out and party, be Mechal Shabbos all they want. According to Beis Shammai, I don't know if I just said Beis Shammai, but that's according to Beis Hillel. They don't have to keep Shabbos. According to Beis Shammai, you are commanded to make sure that your Kelim keep Shabbos. And therefore, this Bryce says Beis Shammai. So now we have to understand, according to Beis Shammai, how come the flour mill would be usher in terms of Shvisas Kelim, yet those other Kelim, but according to Beis Shammai, however, in the Mishnah, he's saying that, soaking dye or whatever, even though if you started soaking the dye, it's not allowed on Shabbos. How come? Right? That would seem to be an issue of Shvisas Kelim. And then yet in this Brisa, there's other things like the Mugmar, right? Like, having the Mugmar, the incense under the clothing, and we're saying that would be okay. So why is, let's say, soaking something over Shabbos not okay, yet kind of having the incense burn over Shabbos would be a problem? Would be okay. So let's figure this out. So the Beis Shammai bein ka'avid ma'aseh bein lo ka'avid ma'aseh aser. So according to Beis Shammai, whether the kli is doing a ma'aseh, like the flour mill, it's mamish grinding the flour, or whether it's not doing a ma'aseh, such as like when you put some water into some ink before Shabbos, and then the ink is soaking on Shabbos, and the kli is just the receptacle for that to happen, and it's passively sort of like, allowing this malacha to happen, and they say that would be a problem. The Beis Hillel, and according to Beis Hillel, even if it's doing a ma'aseh, such as like a flour mill, where the mill is mamish grinding the flour, it would still be okay on Shabbos, because they don't hold the Shvisas Kelim. Well, then now that we said according to Beis Shammai, even though the kli isn't doing anything, it's just passively sort of, containing whatever malacha is happening, well then, ihachi, mugmar v'gafres, my time is sharu Beis Shammai. Well then, how come Beis Shammai say that you're allowed to put incense under your clothing, that you're allowed to put sulfur under silver? Isn't that incense and that sulfur in some kind of a kli? And therefore that kli, even if passively, would still, be involved in some malacha on Shabbos, and you're commanded for it to rest. So, Hasam Manach Ara. So the Gemara answers over there, the sulfur and the incense are not in a receptacle. They're just on the floor. But if they were in a receptacle, then it would not be allowed, as evidenced by, soaking ink over Shabbos, to say it's not allowed, even though the kli is just passively involved. Now this is interesting. Gigis, if you have a vat, if you're preparing beer, and you put this beer in a vat, well, guess what? According to Beis Shammai, if you're fermenting that beer, I guess fermentation might be some kind of a bishul or something, some kind of cooking maybe, technically in Shabbos terms. So if you have a vat and you're preparing beer in the vat, well, this beer is going to be fermenting over Shabbos, and your vat is a kli. Isn't your kli commanded to rest? Aren't you commanded to make sure that your kelim rests on Shabbos? So how can you, according to Beis Shammai, how can you ferment anything for more than a week? Vener, and what about if you have a candle, right? You have a fire, which is havara, and it's happening in a candle. That candle's not resting. Ukedera, ushvud, and if you have a pot that something is cooking in, or if you have a skewer that something's cooking on. My time is sharu Beis Shammai. Demafkalu afkure. So Beis Shammai says that those things would be permitted. Why? Because you make them hefker. Your vat that you're preparing your beer in, Before Shabbos, you said, all right, Zeo, it's Shabbos. I'm commanded to, if this vat belongs to me, I'm commanded to make sure that it rests as well. And therefore, he's going to say, it's not mine anymore. It's hefker. It's ownerless. Now, I wonder if, can now anybody come and take that vat of beer? I don't know. Maybe you could say he was mafker the barrel, but he wasn't mafkir the contents, the beer. So if you take the barrel, then you'd be taking the beer, and the beer is his. You can't take that. I don't know. But anyways. Okay. But according to Beis Shammai, he says that you're commanded to make sure that your vessels, that your kelim, have a restful Shabbos. Whether they're actively doing melacha or whether they're passively doing melacha. Okay. Passively, of course, being, they're just the receptacle for some other malacha to happen, such as soaking ink in a receptacle. So the kli's not doing anything, but it's still going to be considered, that you wouldn't be allowed to do that because you need to make sure it rests. Man tana la de tana rabbanan. Who is the teacher of that which the rabbis taught? Lo tumale isha kedera asasios v'turmasin v'taneach nesoch atanu erev Shabbos m'chashecha v'mnisan l'motzai Shabbos asur m'chdei sheyasu. So who's the teacher who says that a woman should not fill up a pot with these beans that take a really long time to cook? Now I assume that the same would also apply if a man were to fill up this pot. So whoever it is should not fill up this pot with these beans that take a really long time to cook. Don't fill up this pot on Erev Shabbos. And then v'saniach l'tzoch hatanur, and put it in the oven on Erev Shabbos, right before Shabbos. V'im nisanan, right, meaning, of course, with the intention being for these things to cook all of Shabbos, right? So she'll put it in on before Shabbos, and then have these beans cook the entire Shabbos. Well, guess what? If she did that, then the motzai Shabbos asurim b'chdei sheyasu. Then on motzai Shabbos, you can't eat them right away because you did something wrong. We don't want to, it's kilo, we're punishing you and saying, oh yeah, you think you were so smart? Why not just let these beans cook over Shabbos? If you do that, then you'll probably have to wait, I guess, another 24 hours. You could probably only eat it Sunday night. You have to wait enough time, that any benefit you would have gotten from having them cook over Shabbos, will be canceled out. You have to wait enough time that you would be able to cook them from start to finish. Only then can you eat them. Kayotzebo. Similarly, lo yumali nachtom chavis shamayim, a baker. I guess bakers, maybe they would have these big vats of water, and they would need to heat up these big vats of water, and it would take a long time to heat them up. So, he thinks a good idea would be, why don't I just make a fire before Shabbos? I'll stick this big barrel of water on the fire before Shabbos, and it'll heat up throughout Shabbos, and then, Motzai Shabbos, I'll have hot water for my bakery. Right, so limali nachtum chavis shamayim v'aniach l'soch hatanur, and put it in the oven erev Shabbos imchashecha. V'im asakin l'motzai Shabbos asurim b'chdei sheyasu. And if he did put this big barrel of water on the fire, in his oven before Shabbos, so then he won't be able to use this water on Motzai Shabbos until there's enough time for it to heat up. So who would be the author of this? Who would say that what these people are doing, right, this woman who's cooking her beans in the pot, or this baker who's heating up his water in the barrel, they're doing something wrong? So let's say, Lema Beis Shammai. Let's say that it's Beis Shammai v'lo Beis Hillel. Let's say it's Beis Shammai, not Beis Hillel, because Beis Shammai says that you are commanded to make sure that your kelim, that your vessels rest on Shabbos. And these people, by cooking beans or by heating up water, are not allowing their pot or their barrel, respectively, to rest on Shabbos, and therefore we sort of penalize them by saying you have to wait to, benefit from the fruits of your Shabbos labor, or from the Kalim's Shabbos labor, until there's enough time for them to have been able to make these things from scratch on Motzai Shabbos. So let's say it's Beis Shammai who says that you're required to make sure that your vessels keep Shabbos, v'lo Beis Hillel, or have Shabbos, and not Beis Hillel. Because Beis Hillel says there's nothing wrong with Shvizas Kalim. These people didn't do anything wrong. They put these things on Erev Shabbos, and they cook throughout Shabbos. Who cares? So afilu teima Beis Hillel. No, you can even say that it's Beis Hillel who says that you shouldn't put these beans on the fire or the water on the fire. Why? What's the problem? Because Gezerah Shemiyachta begechalim. Beis Hillel is concerned that you might want to speed up the cooking process, so you'll stoke the coals in order to make them hotter and speed up the cooking process. And therefore the beans, right? The beans take a really long time to cook. Rashi even says that they take even more than 24 hours. They take a day and night, a full day and night is not even enough time for these beans to cook. So therefore you might think, so you might stoke the coals in order to try to, make this fire as strong as possible. Or by the hot water, right? Maybe it's not getting hot enough, so you're going to want to, stoke the coals to heat up that process. So therefore even Beis Hillel says it's not an issue of Shvisas Kelim, it's an issue of you might stoke the coals. So therefore they say not to do it. Well, if that's the case, well then Mugmar v'Gafris Nami Ligzor. Well, if that's the case, then Beis Hillel should hold that, it would be a problem to put sulfur under silver or incense under kalim, under clothing, because maybe you're going to stoke the coals. So hasam lo machtelu, no. Over there, you don't have to be worried about stoking the coals for a technicality. Di imachte salikbu kutra v'kashilu. Because if you stoke the coals, well then smoke is going to get either on the silver or on the clothing, and that would be bad for the clothing, so you're not going to stoke the coals. So because you're not going to stoke the coals, Shemiyachta b'Gechalim is not an issue over there, which is very interesting to me. Very interesting. I'm surprised that the Gemara is taking this out. I thought for sure that the Gemara was going to reject, this at some point, because I would figure also, as we learned the other day, that when the Chacham make a Gezerah, it's a low plug. You don't make any exceptions. If they make the gezerah that you don't put something on a fire on Shabbos because we're concerned that you're going to stoke the coals. So I don't care if you tell me, yeah, but, maybe I could stoke the coals because or maybe I could put incense under my clothing, because of course I'm not going to stoke the coals because it's going to ruin my clothing. That's very fancy of you, but it's a low plug. We don't make exceptions. If they said that we don't put things on fire because we're concerned about stoking coals, so then I should apply that everywhere. But the Gemara seems to be happy enough with saying that, okay, sure, yeah, you're allowed to use, this incense or the sulfur because, yeah, you're not going to stoke it because then you're going to ruin the thing. Okay. Onin shapishta nami ligzor. Well, what about these, putting the linen in the oven to, bleach, or at least become white? So shouldn't you be concerned about stoking the coals? Also, there's a technicality there. Hasam kevan dekashilu zika lo megalu lei. Over there, since technically, if you open up the oven in order to stoke the coals, you would also let in fresh air, and that would be bad for the whitening process. So therefore, you're not going to stoke the coals, and that's why that's okay. Semer liyora ligzor. Okay, but maybe we should make a gezerah that you shouldn't, according to Beis Hillel, you shouldn't be allowed to put wool into a kettle for it to die, because maybe you are going to stoke the coals. So Amr Shmuel b'yora akura. So Shmuel says, yeah, but that's talking about a kettle that's no longer on the fire, therefore you're not going to stoke any coals. V'nei choshem magizba. The Gemara says, yeah, but then maybe we should be concerned that then, even if it's not on the fire, maybe you're going to mix, maybe you're going to take a spoon and you're going to mix, and you're going to stir the dye. And Rashi points out that if you stir something that's cooking, it itself is considered bishul, which is really interesting. So like if you go to a chalent or something and you stir it and it's cooking, that would be considered bishul, which is interesting because also we seem to be saying that it's off of the fire, and still, there would be an issue if you mix it even when it's off the fire. So would that imply that like if you take a chalent out of the crock pot and you mix it, it would be considered bishul? Maybe according to Rashi, yes. But I assume that we don't paskin that way. So ba'akura v'tocha. So the Gemara answer is talking about not only was his kettle removed from the fire, but it was also sealed in such a way that it would not be simple to just open it up and mix it. And Rashi points out that, and during the process, of like opening up to mix it, you'd be like, wait, I probably shouldn't be doing this, and you would stop. Right? As opposed to if it was simply like a lid that you can easily take off and mix, then you wouldn't necessarily stop yourself in the process. Seder. But we seem to be saying that Beis Hillel could also say that there would be a problem with putting, letting these beans cook all Shabbos or the hot water cooking all Shabbos because we're concerned that you might stoke the coals. However, if we have any reason to assume that you won't stoke the coals, because by stoking the coals it will be bad for your ultimate, results, so therefore, in that case it would be allowed. You would be allowed to put that thing on the fire on Shabbos, and we wouldn't be concerned about stoking the coals, which is interesting to me. So now that we said that the issue with putting something on a fire over Shabbos is that we're concerned that you're going to stoke the coals, well then, haikidera chaisa, if you were to take a cholent, basically, if you were to take some kind of a pot that's filled with raw ingredients, and you put that on the fire on Erev Shabbos, so shari la'anucha Erev Shabbos mchashecha b'tanura, you would be allowed to put your cholent, which has raw ingredients in it, on the fire, or in the oven, or in our case in a crock pot, on Erev Shabbos. My timer. Because if you take a pot that's full of raw ingredients on Erev Shabbos, and you're basically putting it in the oven to slow cook over Shabbos, you're definitely not planning on eating that for dinner tonight. There's no chance. Cholent is not ready by dinner time, right? Right? So, it's only going to be ready the next morning. So therefore, because, he's putting this pot full of raw ingredients on the fire right before Shabbos, we're not concerned that you're going to stoke the coals. The whole point of stoking the coals is to make something cook faster. At this point, you're not interested in it cooking faster. You know it's not going to be ready anytime soon. So you just put it on the fire and you forget about it until the next morning, and that would be okay. We're not concerned that you're going to stoke the coals. Uvashil shapir dami. And also, if something is already cooked fully, we're also not concerned that you're going to stoke the coals, because stoking the coals is only to increase the heat to make it cook faster, and over here it's already cooked. So now it's just a matter of heating it up. You're not going to stoke the coals. Bashil v'lo bashil asir. The problem is going to be if you have something that's sort of somewhat cooked. It's not fully cooked, but if you would give the coals a little kick, it would cook the thing. So that's what we have to look out for. We'd be concerned about maybe you're going to stoke the coals. But if you throw a raw bone into this somewhat cooked, somewhat not cooked thing, well then you have some raw ingredients there, and that is for sure not going to be cooked, even if you stoke the coals. So at that point it would be permitted, because you're not going to stoke the coals, because it's not going to make a difference. Fine. And now that we said, in the context of the linen that was whitening in the oven, that we don't have to be concerned that you're going to stoke the coals, because you'd have to open the oven in order to stoke the coals, and by opening the oven you would allow wind in there, and the wind or the air would ruin the whitening process, so therefore we're not concerned about stoking the coals. Well then, haibisa de gadya, if you have meat from a kid, from a goat, from a baby goat, visharik, and so you have goat meat, this baby goat meat in the oven, and the oven, the top of the oven, which is generally open, the top is closed and sealed. So now goat meat, baby goat meat, the kid meat, if air gets into the oven, it's bad for the meat. So from that perspective, you have no interest in opening up the oven to stoke the coals, because it's going to let in air, and that's going to be bad for the meat. And additionally, the oven is sealed very well with the sealant, right? It's sealed very well. So because you have two reasons to assume that you're not going to be stoking the coals, it would be permitted. Shapir dami. Now, de barcha, what about a ram? Now, ram's meat, right, which is more mature, if air gets into the oven, it's not going to be detrimental to the meat. Velo sharik, and if the oven is not sealed well, so it'll be very easy to open up the oven, and even if you open up the oven, the air is not going to be detrimental at all to the ram's meat, well then usr, that's going to be forbidden, because it's going to be too easy to open up the oven and stoke the coals. The gadya velo sharik, but however the question is, what about if you have kid meat, which air is bad for it, however it's not sealed very well. So theoretically, even though the air is bad for it, it's got one thing going for it, one thing going against it. What's going for it is that for kid meat, air is bad for it, so you won't want to stoke the coals because then it'll let air in. But at the same time, the thing that's going against it is that it's not sealed very well. So theoretically, it wouldn't be too difficult for you to just lift up the lid of the oven, the cover of the oven, and stoke the coals. Now, the same thing also, the barcha, what if you have a ram? So the air wouldn't be bad for it. However, visharik, but it's sealed very well. So what's going against it is that it's ram's meat. So you might, so the air isn't bad for it. So from that respect, you might stoke the coals, even though air might get in. But at the same time, it's sealed very well. So therefore, you're probably not going to stoke the coals because it's sealed very well. So in these two, mixture cases, where you have one thing, to say that you should be able to, that we shouldn't be concerned about stoking the coals, but the other thing to say that it would be too easy to stoke the coals. So what do you do in those cases? So Rav Ashi Shari, Rav Yirmiyah Midifti Asir. Rav Ashi says in these intermediate cases, it would be okay. You would be allowed to leave it on the fire over Shabbos. You wouldn't have to be concerned about stoking the coals. Rav Yirmiyah Midifti says, no, it would be Asir. We have to be concerned about stoking the coals. Well, Rav Ashi Deshari V'atnan Ein Solim Basar Batzal Uveitza. But according to Rav Ashi, what about the Mishnah that says that we don't roast meat, onions, and eggs on Shabbos? We'd have to make sure that they could be cooked before Shabbos. Well then, what's it talking about? What's the case where it wouldn't be allowed? Well, that's easy. Whoa. What was that noise? Was that thunder? It didn't sound like thunder. It sounded more intense than thunder. Oh my gosh. Hopefully everything's okay. Okay. Anyways, El Kadeshi told him about Yom. So what's that talking about? Well, that's easy. Hasam de Barcha Velo Sharik. It's talking about where it's ram's meat and it is not sealed very well. And therefore, because it's ram's meat that isn't sensitive to wind and it's not even sealed very well, that you would have to make sure that it's roasted well before Shabbos. But any other configuration, right? Whether, it's kid meat that is sealed well, kid meat that's not sealed well, ram's meat that is sealed well, those would all be permitted. Ikadar, those who say, the gadya, if it's kid's meat, well then, bain lo sharik shapir dami. Kid meat, whether the oven is sealed well or whether it is not sealed well, it would be okay because you have no interest in stoking the coal since the air would be bad for the meat. The barcha, if it's ram's meat, visharik shapir dami. If you have ram's meat and it's sealed well, that would also be fine because since it's sealed well, you're not going to stoke the coals. Ki plige de barcha velo sharik. The machlokas between Rav Ashi and Rav Yirmiyah Midifti is when you have ram's meat that is not sealed very well. To Rav Ashi Shai, Rav Yirmiyah Midifti Asir. The Rav Ashi says that it is permitted. Even though it's ram's meat and it's not sealed well, it's permitted, it's no problem. And Rav Yirmiyah Midifti says it would be problematic because since it's ram's meat and the air isn't bad for it, since it's not sealed well, it would be too easy to stoke the coals. So therefore he says it's also. Now according to Rav Ashi, who says that basically every single situation is permitted, all kid situations, all ram situations would be permitted. We wouldn't be concerned about stoking the coals. Well then, v'hatnan ein solin basar batzal uveitza ela kadei sheitzolim bod yom. What about that Mishnah that says that we have to make sure that the meat is properly cooked before Shabbos starts? What's that talking about? According to Rav Ashi, all configurations of kid and ram meat would be permitted to cook on Shabbos. So Hasan bebisra agomre. So Rav Ashi says that's talking about if you just have meat straight up on a grill. Kilu, not in an oven, just on a grill, and you got the coals right there. It's way too easy to just soak the coals, so that would be not allowed. Ravina, Haikara Chaya. Ravina says if you have a raw gourd and you put it on a fire, Shapir Dami, it's no problem. Kevin Dekashile Zika Kibisra Degadya Dami. Since if air would get into the oven, it would be detrimental to the cooking of the gourd. So therefore it's like a kid and it would be permitted. You're not concerned that you're going to open up the oven in order to stoke the coals. Okay, let's finish up here. Beishamai omrim ein mochin. Beishamai says that you're not allowed to sell anything to a non-Jew before Shabbos, unless there's enough time for him to get home before Shabbos starts. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Beishamai omrim lo yimkor adam chefzo lenachri. A person should not sell an object. A Jew should not sell an object to a non-Jew. V'lo yashilenu. He shouldn't lend anything to a non-Jew. V'lo yalvenu. He shouldn't lend him money. Right? The first one is lending objects. The second one is lending money. V'lo yitein lo b'matana. He shouldn't give him a gift before Shabbos. According to Beis Shammai, there would have to be enough time for the non-Jew to get home before Shabbos starts. Beis Hillel says he wouldn't have to get all the way home, but he would have to get inside of the wall of the city that he lives in. And at that point, he could already put it down. So once he can get into the city that he lives in, within the wall of the city that he lives in, that would be fine. Rabbi Akiva Omer says, Rabbi Akiva says that no, once the non-Jew is outside of the house of the Jew, it's no longer the Jew's responsibility, and that's that. You know, so as long as he sells it to the guy before Shabbos, that's fine. Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda heinen divrei Rabbi Akiva heinen divrei Beis Hillel lo bar Rabbi Akiva el lefarsh divrei Beis Hillel. So according to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Akiva is not arguing with Beis Hillel, he's explaining Beis Hillel. Right? Basically, Rashi says that there was like some guy in the Beis HaMedrash who was saying that Beis Hillel says that you would have to sell it to the non-Jew with enough time for the non-Jew to get home, to get to his city, within the walls of his city. Rabbi Akiva is saying no, Beis Hillel's opinion is that he just has to get outside of the house of the Jew, and then at that point, you know, as long as he gets out before Shabbos starts, that would be okay. So he's not arguing, he's just explaining. Wow, okay, that was a complicated daf. I think it's already close to an hour. It was a really good daf, but it was intense. There was a lot there. But we learned about some great stuff about, starting malachas before Shabbos, letting them continue on Shabbos. What could be the problem in terms of shvisas kelim? Requiring that your vessels rest on Shabbos. Talking about cooking on Shabbos, stoking coals and what the concerns are over there. We talked about kneading, right? We're starting to get already into, right? We started to mention already a few malachas other than hotzah, right? Lush and bishul, things like that, different rabbanan. So that was interesting. I hope everybody enjoyed. It was an intense daf, but I hope everybody enjoyed, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Peace out.